Hello, my name is Kayla Cosmo, and the high prep differentiation strategy that I chose for my lesson today is cubing. And what cubing is it's a way for students to look at a subject or a topic from a bunch of different perspectives. Um, the way cubing works is that task or discussion topics are on each side of a die, and so when students roll it, they'll do what is displayed on the dice. And so think of it like as if you're playing Yahtzee and you see your three at the top. Well, if they're sitting there and they're rolling the dice to see what book topic they will be exploring, and the top of the dice says plot, then that's what they'll be talking about. And that's what my lesson focuses on, is using cubing to help students explore different topics within independent reading books that they've chosen. So, the title of my lesson is Fantasy Cubes because I was having a hard time thinking of something witty and original. It's an English language arts lesson and it's meant for fifth grade. This lesson is designed for one 80-minute long class period, and it ties into another lesson that they'll be having after, which is writing essays based off of the topics of their cube that they had to discuss. So, our learning outcomes and assessments. A learning outcome is that students will be able to understand the characters, plot points, and major conflicts within a piece of assigned text. And so the way that this will be assessed is through a formative assessment revolving around the cubing activity that we're doing. When students do the cubing activity, they will be writing down their responses to the different sections of the cube in a table that will be provided, and this will help me get their understanding of the different sections of their books and the concepts that are associated with it. The Common Core standard linked to this is students will be able to determine a theme of a story, drama, or poem from details in the text, including how characters in a story or drama respond to challenges, or how the speaker in a poem reflects upon a topic. And this will also help them summarize the test. Um, another learning, scroll too far. Another learning outcome is that students will be able to compare and contrast different events and characters within a piece of assigned text. And so this ties into the character section of the cube. Well, they'll have to pick a character and talk about how they interact with the other characters, how they tie into the different key points, how they help the story move along, etc. And it also ties into a section of the cube that involves conflicts, because the conflicts typically involve multiple characters, and the way those characters interact is usually key to it, especially in fantasy books, which is what the students have been focusing on during this lesson. So that's the learning outcome, and this will be assessed the same way as the other learning outcome was assessed, and that is through a formative assessment revolving around the cubing activity, and this is through the table where they'll be jotting down the topics that they've discussed, and these tables will be used to help them create their final essay. So the 3 or 4 topics that they use the tube to help them discuss with their partner, that's what they'll be talking about throughout their essay, and so that will be the body paragraphs. And the Common Core standard for this learning outcome is students will be able to compare and contrast 2 or more characters, settings, or events in a story or drama, drawing on specific details in the text. And then an example is how characters interact. And so students will be, when students do their cubing activity with the table, they'll be asked to draw upon specific examples from the text, and this also ties into their essay where they will have to use multiple examples from their piece of text. Next up, we have our materials and supplies section. And so materials will be a small pencil holder containing popsicle sticks with students' names, and this will help me create partnered groups. This makes it so that the groups are mixed ability, and so I won't be choosing groups based on reading level or their proficiency within class. This makes it so if students are paired together with one has an average reading level, one has a lower reading level, or like etc., that they'll be able to gain different perspectives, and they'll also be able to help each other out. Students will also need the fantasy novel of their choosing. This will be chosen before the lesson. This lesson is based off of right when they have finished it. And the criteria is just that it is a fantasy book and that it is within their reading level. Another piece of material or supply is a pre-made large example of a cube for the demonstration within class. And so this will just be a larger cutout cube that has all the same labeled components on it. So plot, conflict, resolution, etc. And this will be made so students know how to use their cube during their discussions and that they have a model to base their activity off of. Students will also need their literary cube template, scissors and safety scissors for students who may need those instead. Glue sticks, those three things are so that they can actually make their cubes. They will not have to write down the different components of the cubes though, since that is already labeled. And then students will also need a summary table where they will be writing down their responses that they've discussed with their partner. So under the procedures, the first part of the lesson is 15 minutes, and the teacher will lead a discussion going over the ends of the students' chosen books that they should have just finished. And so this is a way to segue the students into the English lesson after doing whatever it is that we may be doing in class. This kind of brings everybody in and helps refresh everybody on what they have been doing in their books. So what the student will do is the student will discuss their feelings about the ending of their book, what happened during it, any thoughts they may have had while they were reading it, how it connects to different things that they have read in other books or have seen on the news, etc. And this just gets students back into their books. It gets them excited and it lets other students know what has been going on. The next part of the lesson will be 15 minutes, and the teacher will explain that today's lesson will be focused on reviewing the individual books that they have just finished reading as a whole and looking at the individual aspects of the book. The teacher will then explain that this lesson will be helpful for the fantasy book presentations that the students will need to be submitting at the end of the unit. And that fantasy book presentation will be their essay that they wrote. I just worded that in a very weird way, which I will have to fix later. Students So what the student will do is the students will show good listening skills that we've discussed in class before, and they will ask clarifying questions if they need it. And so if the student doesn't understand what is going on with the lesson, then they can ask now. And the final part of the lesson will take 60 minutes, and this is the big hunk. This is actually the cubing activity. So what the teacher will do is the teacher will give an example of how to use the learning cube with the larger example cube that we talked about in the material section earlier. The teacher will then walk around the room and observe students as they have their discussions, helping the groups that may be struggling, whether it be with the content or keeping things on task. And so the teacher's job at this point, since it is a discussion-based lesson, is to be the moderator during the situation. This isn't a heavily teacher-focused moment. And so this is why the student section is much longer. The students will have to be paired up with a partner, and this will be decided with the popsicle sticks like discussed earlier. So with a partner, the students will create their cubes using the template provided. They will use the cubes to lead their discussion on their independent fantasy books that they have been reading outside of class. Students will write down their responses to each section on the table provided. They will also need students who may need extra time can take their work home and complete the sections on their own. That's why the cubes are paper. They've made them themselves. They're portable. And each student will have their own cube since it does not take long to make. Students who are below the reading level / proficiency level might only have to write down the responses for 3 or 4. That's supposed to be 3 sections. May have to only write down the responses for 3 sections instead of all 6, and students who demonstrate abilities above the proficiency level may be asked extra questions that delve deeper into the plot of their books and that require more critical thinking skills. And so instead of questions based more on their opinion, like can you summarize the plot of the book, it will be why do you think this author chose this specific theme for the book and how is that shown? These questions that make them really think more about their book and have them provide more textual evidence. And so for our materials for the lesson, we have this little sheet describing what students will need to do. And so I'm not going to read this for you since it is very crazy. But this basically is describing what I just described to you, that they will be with their partner, they will make their cubes and take turns rolling their cubes until they have at least 4 sections filled out on their table, and that these sections will be what they use to help with their essay later. And then I have questions and topics for them to talk about within each section, if they so happen to land on that cube. And so the first 3 are longer because they're a little bit harder. They require more thinking skills, or they require more evidence. And so characters, they need to choose a character from their book and describe their physical attributes, personality, why they are key to the story, any background information, how they interact with other characters. They need to discuss their opinions on if they are written as a good character, etc. The same goes for the plot and conflict. That involves interactions with other characters and more textual evidence. And the bits that involve just parts of the plot, such as rising action, climax, resolution, those are just summarizing ones. And so that makes it so students have a mix of different difficulty levels when creating their discussions and their essays later on. Then we have our fantasy summary table, which is just where students will record their topics that they've been discussing, whichever they've landed on with the cubes. And so we've just got characters, plot, rising action, climax, resolution, and conflict. And students, if needed, if they need more writing space because of handwriting or just because they are jotting down a lot of notes, then they can use a separate piece of lined paper to put down these answers. This is just a more organized template to help students keep their thoughts together. And last, we have our actual cube template. And so it has instructions in the upper left-hand corner of how to cut out the cube, glue the tabs using a glue stick, etc. And then we have our different sections such as character, conflict, rising action, resolution, plot, and climax. And so the point of this lesson is not only is there differentiation with the choice of books that students get to get, but the cubing lesson itself gives students differentiation with a variety of topics for them to explore within their fantasy novel that kind of revolve around the same issues of characters with their interactions with each other and plot and how they relate. And it also gives students a variety of difficulty levels to choose from, or to explore, not to choose from, to have the option to get. And so this has been my lesson about cubing as a form of high prep differentiation. I'm so sorry for how fast I've been talking and the stuttering throughout this, but hopefully this is easy to follow along with. If you have any questions, then let me know below.